Again, one little note, the non-combatant population in the Gaza Strip is really a non-existent term because all of the Gazans have voted for the Hamas. And as we have seen on the 7th of October, most of the population in the Gaza Strip are Hamas.
Remember that the citizens of Gaza, these innocent civilians who so many people are shedding tears about, they voted for Hamas in the last election.
I would encourage the other side to not so lightly throw around the idea of innocent Palestinian civilians, as is frequently said. I don't think we would so lightly throw around the term innocent Nazi civilians during World War II. There are very few innocent Palestinian civilians.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
And I don't like how people tried to differentiate between the Palestinians and Hamas. They believe the same thing. The Palestinians hire Hamas to run their government. You poll them, they all love killing Jews. It's in their charter.
There was a meme that I tweeted comparing, I think it was like the Palestinian flag to the Nazi one, which should have been a Hamas flag. I agree that they're kind of separate people, although that's really hard to say for the Gaza Strip. I don't know if that's true for Gaza.
There are a lot of people in Gaza who do not like Hamas, who are not part of Hamas.
Is that true? Because I thought my understanding is Hamas has enjoyed pretty widespread support in Gaza since 2006.
When approaching history, it's easy and convenient to otherize, dehumanize, and reduce nations of millions of people into neat little categories. It doesn't take any effort or critical thinking. It also makes people feel good about themselves and the side they support in any war. An embarrassingly naive and asinine assertion that their side is intrinsically good and the other is intrinsically bad. To take the ultimate example, comparisons to Nazi Germany abound in the lead-up to conflicts. Take Iraq. In April 2003, shortly after the invasion, CNN's senior political analyst Bill Schneider wrote in The Atlantic, "The problem in Iraq is not just Saddam Hussein, it's an entire political structure. His Ba'ath Party must be destroyed." Iraq is a police state governed by a totalitarian party, much like Hitler's Nazi Party. Further, Hitler had the SS, Saddam has his Republican Guard. When Saddam and his henchmen are gone, the Ba'ath regime will crumble, just as the Nazi Party did after Hitler's suicide in the Berlin bunker. He also quotes then Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. "It's almost like cutting off the head of the snake, and the rest of the body will go." Wolfowitz, an influential hawk who helped sway the Bush administration in favor of toppling Saddam, was obsessed with comparing Saddam to Hitler. This orientation toward Nazism would prove central to his thinking on Iraq. Again and again, he would describe Saddam Hussein and his security forces as the modern equivalent to the Gestapo. It was almost a verbal tic for him, said Thomas Ricks in his book Fiasco. If one was convinced that Saddam Hussein was the modern equivalent of Hitler, and his secret police the contemporary version of the Gestapo, then it was easy to see and portray anyone opposing his aggressive policies as the moral equivalent of Neville Chamberlain. So for years, Wolfowitz prodded the American people toward war with Iraq. So we see that this comparison has parallels in history which have spurred dire consequences. Comparing a state or a people with Nazi Germany has a powerful and compelling effect on many people. It achieves the goal of dehumanizing an entire civilian population. This is done through a presupposition which most seem to take for granted. Germany was the Nazis, and Germans were Nazis. Fascinating and important work has actually been done on public opinion in Nazi Germany, not least of which being The Germans and the Final Solution, Public Opinion Under Nazism, by David Bankier, who led the Holocaust Research Institute at Yad Vashem, the official Israeli memorial to the Shoah. The study utilized Gestapo reports, as well as reports from district governors in Prussia and Bavaria, encompassing the majority of the German population. He also scoured SD reports, as in the Siegerheitsdienst, the Nazi spy agency, and underground publications from opposition parties. Bankier showed that, with an absence of freedom of expression, it was still important to understand the opinions of the general public, in order to identify dissent. As a result, the Nazi security services conducted regular, secret reports on public opinion, called situation reports or reports on the public mood. Benkir demonstrates that the idea of a monolithic German society actually reflected the Nazi propaganda and its goal. It was 1932 when Hitler's Nazi Party came to dominate the Reichstag, although only by winning 37% of the national vote. And support only declined from there. From then on, in contrast to this idealized state of affairs, our sources revealed that, from as early as summer 1934, the euphoria which had accompanied the party's rise and ascension to power was steadily on the wane. Indeed, he reports attitudes in Germany were characterized by growing distaste for political action, unwillingness to participate in mass mobilization campaigns, and reluctance to support Nazi rallies, parades, and meetings. Indeed, official propaganda was often met with passive hostility. The Dusseldorf Gestapo station reported about the indifferent and often apathetic disposition of broad sectors of the population. Following May Day festivities in 1935, the Münster Gestapo station reported, "The public mood has considerably deteriorated in recent weeks, particularly among the local workers." The notion that all Germans underwent a process of social atomization in the Third Reich is nearer to Nazi propaganda than to historical reality. For people like Brian Mast, history is uncomplicated, and his choice of wording is revealing.
I don't think we would so lightly throw around the term innocent Nazi civilians.
And of course, he's not alone in his sentiment. But as we can see for ourselves, Germany was filled with scores of civilians who were not affiliated with or even agreed with the Nazi Party, and indeed belonged to other opposition parties. So by firebombing Dresden and Hamburg, one can safely assume that many of them were simply German civilians, rather than Nazi ones. We can look to these bombing campaigns of civilian areas and conclude that they did little, if anything, to end the war. Indeed, the US War Department's official study of aerial bombing after the war concluded that not cities, but industrial targets were the major success of the Allied air campaign. The importance of careful selection of targets for air attack is emphasized by the German experience. The Germans were far more concerned over attacks on one or more of their basic industries and services, their oil, chemical, or steel industries, or their power or transportation network, than they were over attacks on their armament industry or the city areas. The official British report of the air campaign shared similar, if not more candid language. The British area offensive, area bombing as in the bombing of cities, had failed both to break German morale and to stem the rise in arms production. Insofar as the offensive against German towns was designed to break the morale of the German civilian population, it clearly failed. Far from lowering essential war production, it also failed to stem a remarkable increase in the output of armaments. Not only did these needlessly savage bombings do practically nothing to end the war, we can conclude that a great many of the people killed did absolutely nothing wrong. People don't say that much, but when this is the principal justification for mechanized mass slaughter, and one accepts for argument's sake that Saddam is Hitler or Hamas are the Nazis, it should trouble you to know that Germany was not a monolith. And that brings me to the broader point, that more often than not, a vast population of millions of people are hardly ever a robotic hive mind entranced by a cult of personality. And in Gaza, that couldn't be further from the truth. As of the release of this video, there's an ongoing hostage situation in Gaza. I saw this headline from Ground News. Hamas says it will delay next hostage releases over Gaza aid dispute. In very subtle ways, headlines can be tweaked to convey certain narratives. Luckily, Ground News actually provides all the articles in one place and shows additional context on where this news is coming from so we can compare coverage and see the full story. This story has been picked up all over the world. In fact, there's been over 70 articles published, and the coverage is skewed to the right. More than half of these articles are coming from mixed factuality sources, telling me there's likely to be some subjective and sensationalized coverage. Looking closer at the headlines, we can see many of these sources emphasizing the delay in releasing the hostages. Some sources cite the logistical challenges leading to a delay, claiming a dispute over allowing aid trucks into Gaza as part of the agreement. I've been following their timeline on the Israel-Palestine conflict to see how media coverage differs depending on political affiliation. I think what Ground News is doing is really important, and I encourage you to check it out. Go to ground.news hamasnews.com/GDF. Subscribe through my link for less than $1 a month, or take advantage of their biggest discount of the year, 40% off their Vantage plan for unlimited access, which is what I have. Get access to data-driven information and support my channel in the meantime. We're all well aware now that in 2006, parliamentary elections were held in Gaza. Hamas was voted into power. To outsiders, it is easy to assume that this was an endorsement by the populace of Hamas's founding charter, their anti-Semitism, their fanatical ideology and politics. Hamas had, after all, up to this point, engaged in violent terrorist attacks on Israelis, including the use of suicide bombings on non-military targets. In reality, however, the election results are better framed as a rebuke of the previous authority, Fatah. In fact, opinion on the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority in Gaza and the West Bank both dropped dramatically year after year leading up to 2006. According to studies by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, in 2001, 74% of Palestinians believed that the Palestinian Authority was corrupt. By 2003, it was 81%. By the end of 2005, that number was 86%, the better part of the entire population. They were right. By 2006, 60% of the Palestinian Authority's budget was devoted to salaries. The Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research duly initiated an exit poll following the election, where they observed that crumbling peace process and a greater public complaint of corruption and chaos gave Hamas a limited advantage over Fatah, but fragmentation within Fatah turned that advantage into an overwhelming victory. This poll is very informative, listing in detail the reasons why Hamas won. The results of the exit poll clearly show that Hamas's victory in the legislative elections was due to three factors. Number one, the peace process is no longer at the top of people's priorities. Findings show that only a small minority of voters considered the peace process to be a top Palestinian priority. Voters saw the peace process deadlocked with little or no chance of revitalization. This outcome should not, however, be interpreted as indicating a decline in the level of support for Israeli-Palestinian peace. Indeed, exit poll results clearly indicate that a clear majority of Fatah supporters, as well as the combined voters of all other nationalist lists, as well as 1/3 of Hamas voters, support the basic elements of the peace process, such as the two-state solution. Number two, findings depict a widespread voter disillusionment with PA governance, particularly in areas of fighting corruption and enforcing law and order. These two issues were the top priorities of the public. Moreover, voters have lost confidence in the ability of Fatah to lead state building in these two areas. The success of Hamas in elevating the status of corruption and lawlessness to top priorities constituted a magnificent achievement ensuring its victory in the elections. And number three, Hamas's success would have remained relatively small had it not been for Fatah's widespread fragmentation in the electoral districts. In fact, Hamas did not succeed in winning the support of the majority of the voters. To the contrary, the majority vote went to Fatah and other nationalist secularist groups, which together won 56% of the popular vote versus Hamas's 44%. Another enlightening resource is an article by Angela Stevens for worldpublicopinion.org, a site managed by the Program for Public Consultation of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. Stevens writes, new polling following the election indicates that 2/3 of Palestinians, or 63%, believe Hamas should change its policy of rejecting Israel's right to exist. Most also support a two-state solution. Post-election polls indicate that Hamas's victory is due largely to Palestinians' desire to end corruption in government rather than support for the organization's political platform. Even among those who voted for Hamas, only 37% support Hamas's position that Israel does not have the right to exist. Fighting corruption was cited as the most important priority for the new government by 30% of respondents, more than any other priority. The extent of the problem was highlighted earlier this month when the Palestinian Authority Attorney General announced that some $700 million had been stolen from the authority's coffers. 2/3, 65%, said they believe corruption will decrease under a Hamas-led government. One interesting and perhaps overlooked detail was voter regret. Only 41% said that they would vote for Hamas if the election were held again, down from the 45% who voted for Hamas. This suggests that rather than consolidating their position with the Palestinian electorate, some may now be feeling uneasy about the outcome, suggesting that some may have voted for Hamas as a kind of protest vote rather than out of a desire or expectation that Hamas would win. Indeed, 74% of those polled did not expect Hamas's overwhelming victory. Stevens cites a poll from the Jerusalem Media and Communications Center, which provides the most compelling data with regard to the reasons why Palestinians voted for Hamas. When asked why they chose Hamas, the highest ratio, 43%, of Palestinians who voted for Hamas said they did so with the hope of ending corruption. Only 18% voted for Hamas for religious reasons, and only 11% voted for Hamas because of its political agenda. It's very eerie that literally on the eve of the October 7th attacks, surveys were being conducted on public opinion in the Palestinian territories. In fact, between September 28th and October 6th, interviews were carried out in Gaza in a study compiled by Arab Barometer in collaboration with Foreign Affairs magazine, the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, with funding from the National Endowment for Democracy. Foreign Affairs characterized the project as the longest-running and most comprehensive public opinion project in the region. Arab Barometer has run 8 waves of surveys covering 16 countries in the Middle East and North Africa since 2006. The results of the latest survey were first published exclusively by Foreign Affairs. The argument that the entire population of Gaza can be held responsible for Hamas's actions is quickly discredited when one looks at the facts. Rather than supporting Hamas, the vast majority of Gazans have been frustrated with the armed group's ineffective governance as they endure extreme economic hardships. Most Gazans do not align themselves with Hamas's ideology either. Unlike Hamas, whose goal is to destroy the Israeli state, the majority of survey respondents favored a two-state solution with an independent Palestine and Israel existing side by side. The survey's findings reveal that Gazans had very little confidence in their Hamas-led government. Asked to identify the amount of trust they had in the Hamas authorities, a plurality of respondents said they had no trust at all. Not a lot of trust was the second most common response at 23%. Only 29% of Gazans expressed either a great deal or quite a lot of trust in their government. Tragically, Gazans' desperate hopes for a reduction in corruption has been met with extraordinary disappointment, as 72% said there was a large or medium amount of corruption. Given the low opinion most Gazans hold for their government, it was unsurprising that their disapproval extends to Hamas as a political party. Just 27% of respondents selected Hamas as their preferred party, slightly less than the proportion who favored Fatah, the party that is led by Abbas and that governs the West Bank. Leadership style is not the only thing that Gazans find objectionable about Hamas. By and large, Gazans do not share Hamas's goal of eliminating the State of Israel. Overall, 73% of Gazans favored a peaceful settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On the eve of Hamas's October 7th attack, just 20% of Gazans favored a military solution that could result in the destruction of the State of Israel. In conclusion, as seen in the single most important takeaway from the survey results, Hamas won 44.5% of the Palestinian vote in parliamentary elections in 2006, but support for the group plummeted after a military conflict between Hamas and Fatah in June 2007 ended in Hamas's takeover of Gaza. In a poll conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research in December 2007, just 24% of Gazans expressed favorable attitudes toward Hamas. Over the next few years, as Israel tightened its blockade of Gaza and ordinary Gazans felt the effects, approval of Hamas increased, reaching about 40% in 2010. Israel partially eased the blockade the same year, and Hamas's support in Gaza leveled off before declining to 35% in 2014. In periods when Israel cracks down on Gaza, Hamas's hardline ideology seems to hold greater appeal for Gazans. Thus, rather than moving the Israelis and Palestinians toward a peaceful solution, Israeli policies that inflict pain on Gaza in the name of rooting out Hamas are likely to perpetuate the cycle of violence. As we can clearly see, support for Hamas governance initially reached a euphoric peak with the 2006 election, motivated by Fatah corruption and promises for social reforms. Hamas staged a compelling campaign based on an agenda of economic transparency and welfare programs for the poor. This support, which was hopeful and wary from the start, waned considerably over time until it was somewhat abysmal. The people of Gaza are very clearly and importantly not Hamas. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching, and if you found this video helpful, here's how you can help. If you're watching on Twitter, give me a follow at GDF on X. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to GDF. Please become a patron. Just look up GDF or go to patreon.com/GDFofficial. There you can join my Discord and follow news with all of us in real time. There's also several exclusive videos there. I also accept donations. But most importantly of all, share this video, like this video, and follow or subscribe whether you're on Twitter or on YouTube. Love you guys. Take care.